Good afternoon, and welcome to the Dr. Kennedy Podcast. The Dr. Kennedy Podcast is sponsored by the Daniels Foundation for Impact Investments and Development. That's the Daniels Foundation for Impact Investments and Development. And I want to say good afternoon, and it's been a wonderful day here in sunny Florida. And have the privilege of this afternoon of interviewing a good friend of mine, Joe Foster. And Joel is from eastorange. He's currently a financial advisor in Chicago. He's done very well. He's a graduate of Babson College. We obtained a degree in accounting and finance. And Joel may not know this, but when I got my PhD, I had interviewed with Babson College as a finance professor, and they actually offered me a job. So we had to talk about Babson, what it could have been. And it's interesting to know that Joel is a graduate of Babson. He's done very well there, and Babson's a wonderful university up in Massachusetts. So we had to talk to Joel about his experience of East Orange to Babson is quite a contrast in, population and probably his expectations and things. So we had to talk for that. So Joel went on to a 25-year career at UPS, where he excelled in accounting duties. He had supervisory roles in the firm's accounting department. He led the controllers department and head of district accounting for UPS in upstate New York, and he managed over $6 million for an annual budget for the firm. And in 2011, he began his second career as a financial advisor for Edwards Jones in Forest Park, Illinois. So Joel knows a lot about finance and wealth management. You want to know, what does that mean for the minority community? What does that mean for Black America? What should we be thinking about in terms of going forward, in terms of investing, entrepreneurship? So Joel can help us kind of formulate some ideas there. What does he think about reparations? Is that something that we can look to successfully with some of the strategy that, and of course, we could talk about Black Lives Matters. But, Joel's just a great guy. He's also has a sports background. Also, he's in Chicago, and Chicago is kind of a very interesting hub for Black America in terms of progressive Black thought. I would put it on the same scale as Atlanta in terms of a lot of innovative and creative Black leaders in Chicago. And so maybe we'll also pick Joel's head about what's happening in Chicago in terms of, Chicago could be a role model for what the East Coast should be thinking about in terms of leading a major, I would call it a chocolate city on the scale of Atlanta. And ironically, even though we have that kind of in New Jersey, New York area, we don't really have a lot of Black businesses that are thriving like in Atlanta and Chicago. So maybe we can pick Joel's head about that, see what he thinks about that. So sit back, folks. We have a great interview coming. We're going to speak to Joe Foster, and that's our introduction, and we'll see you on the other side and talk with Joe. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and we're back live with Mr. Joe Foster, and this is the Dr. Kennedy Podcast. And the Kennedy Podcast is sponsored by the Daniels Foundation for Impact Investments and Development. That's the Daniels Foundation for Impact Investments and Development. So, folks, we have Joe Foster. Joe, how you doing?
Doing great, Ken. How are you? Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here.
Yeah, doing great, Joel. And I'm in sunny Florida, and you're in Chicago, and I'm glad we got a chance to talk to you because I think Chicago has a lot of good, parallels to what can happen in New York City. Because I think, in some ways, Chicago's ahead of New York in terms of, Black power structure and so forth. And hopefully we'll get into that as we get into our little interview here. But Joe, why don't you tell the folks what you've been up to in general? What you've been up to?
2020 is, for everybody, has been an interesting year. So I was already working from home. Kind of doing that, trying to manage clients, from remote. Mm-hmm. A lot of Zoom calls like this. I was getting to a point where I was a little zoomed out, but, was able to maintain, continuing to work, keeping my family, trying to keep my family safe, and, just doing what I can do right now.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for agreeing to do an interview. I know it's a busy time of year, the first of the year, so really appreciate your support. So, I already did a nice introduction for you about your background, but why don't you tell us, where things started for you in terms of your education, some of your first job experiences, and
Sure.
What got you into some of your business experience?
So started off similar to you, East Orange, New Jersey, Panther for life.
Mm-hmm.
Finished high school, wanted a small college. Accounting was something I thought I wanted to do because I was good in math, but didn't really want to pursue any type of sciences. So, accounting after doing a little research. So I discovered Babson College, where I went on to major in both accounting and finance. My time there. When I came back to Jersey, I was able to start working for Channel Home Centers, which back in the day was a little preemptive to Home Depot, a little more regional to the East Coast. So I went into their accounting department there from a retail, moved over to general ledger. In the meantime, when I was in college, my college roommate was from Bermuda. So I was going to his wedding and I wanted to get a little extra money. So I took a part-time job at UPS. And it turned out to be better than my health club. They were paying me and I was losing weight. So I kept taking it 3 months at a time. I said, all right, I made enough money to go to Bermuda so I wasn't robbing Peter to pay Paul. Had a good time, came back, and I said, all right, you know what? I'll give it another 3 months. So another 3 months went by, started seeing my bank account growing. So I did another 3 months. And, next thing I know, I was buying a new car. And then they stopped me one day and said, hey, what do you do? We know you work a full-time job. We see you change when you leave here. And when I told them I was an accountant, they were like, hey, you know what? Our controller might want to talk to you. We're looking for accountants. And I ended up meeting with the accountant at UPS in Parsippany, is where I was working at the time. And they made me an offer. I had to become a driver back then in order to, go into management at UPS. You had to be a driver. Mm-hmm. So, I did that. They kind of promised me that, hey, we need to put you out there, but, 6 months we'll bring you in. And they did. I went into their payroll department and, that what I thought was only going to be a 3-month experience turned out to be a 25-year career at UPS. And in that time, I moved all over the country. When I left Jersey, spent my first 15 years throughout New Jersey. Parsippany, Edison, Metroplex, different places. Went to Arizona on a special assignment. I ended up being reload there, promoted to manager, a few years there. Later moved on to Omaha, Nebraska, where I went back into the operations as the accounting manager, and then promoted to controller and moved to upstate New York. So, UPS was a good ride for me. It took me places. Showed me parts of the country that I don't think I would have seen on my own. It was a good experience. Moved my family a lot. So in retrospect, I think differently of that now. But, when you're doing it, you think you're doing the best thing. And I think overall it was a good experience for everybody. But that was really, my career, 25 years at UPS. And then as you and I were talking earlier, when I had a little revelation about, what's going to be next in my life, and I was shown some things, is when I left, took a buyout in 2010, and knew that one thing I was able to do at UPS when I was there was I got involved with a lot of community nonprofits where I was able to give UPS's money away. And I loved giving their money away to good causes. And, it spurred me to think that maybe when I was done, nonprofit would be an area that I would go into, or financial services. And when I did finally leave, I decided to go into financial services. So after leaving about a year, I started working with Edward Jones as a financial advisor. Did Edward Jones from 2011 to 2017, and then moved over to an asset management company on an independent RIA platform. So with all that said, that's where I am now, managing assets as a wealth manager and partner with Kingsview Kingsview Wealth Management now.
That's interesting. I got a lot of questions for you because you, first of all, as you and I know, we both went to East Orange High School, primarily Black high school. So how did you end up at Babson? Did they recruit you? How did you even have knowledge of Babson from East Orange?
So when you take the SAT, they had that student search. Yeah. And, so I put my name in for student search. I said accounting, finance were my areas of interest. And, I got some information from Babson and, talked to my dad. We were going around looking at schools at the time, thanks to the counselors in East Orange. We did a lot of, trips to colleges. So we were up in Massachusetts at one point, and I decided, you know what, I really like to check it out. I thought I wanted a small school. And when I went up there, I saw it and said, you know what, hey, I definitely want to put this on my list. It wasn't the first school I had heard from. Rider College was someplace else I was looking at because, they had a pretty good accounting program at the time. And I actually had matriculated to Rider, and then Babson reached out and said, hey, we want you to come on up. And I was like, okay, I just lost a few bucks, but I'm going to Massachusetts. So,
That's beautiful.
So that's how, that started.
Okay. So, I kind of did something similar. I went from East Orange to Fairfield, predominantly white school, and I, had a little bit of culture shock. So how about you? Did you have any culture shock? Because Babson at the time, was it all male at the time? Was it all male school?
Nope. It was co-ed, but culture shock is putting it lightly. My freshman year, I was one of 14 African-American students coming into the program. And I think that was the biggest class they had in the last 4 or 5 years. I think the total population might have been 30. So it was definitely culture shock, coming out of East Orange. And, again, it took some adjusting, not being very confident, that kind of played on a lot of things, just, really just trying to figure out who I was and understanding myself a little better.
Let's make this productive for young Black males that maybe consider this experience like you and I. Like, you go, you get these colleges, you go on a view and you're African male, but you go to an all white campus or predominantly white campus. You might be a little bit unsure or unconfident. What advice would you give them? Particularly how give an idea of how you relate in the class. How did you get comfortable and confident in the classroom, which is really the key thing?
It was challenging for me in the beginning, to be honest. I did a lot of listening and very little talking in the beginning. Just really trying to figure out, who I could trust, kind of watching how professors reacted to me when I did speak. So, really just kind of, trying to tread water a little bit, asking questions. In retrospect, what I didn't do that, I encourage my students that I mentor now is professors have hours afterwards for a reason. Go talk to them.
Right.
They need to get to know you a little better. I was a little hesitant in doing that, but when I opened up and started realizing that, that helped me get a little more comfortable because now I was able to speak a little more one-on-one, with a professor versus, being in that open classroom and, not sounding like everybody else, not looking like everybody else. And, just really, trying to navigate that.
Yeah. I think that's great advice because that's the thing that did it for me is I connected with a professor in Fairfield. His name was Edward Deek, and that really, it took me to a whole nother level. Once I connected with him and I got a little bit more sure-footed, I became a little bit more, outspoken in class and a little more daring in terms of my, educational attempts. And I think, that's where you start to really learn. You start to find out what you like, don't like, and what your, educational curiosity is. So what kind of educational curiosity do you have beyond accounting? If you, what did you find? What did you like at school?
So, I was forced to take some elective classes that, I would always say, like, why do I need this? I want to, I'm trying to get a job, as a bean counter, but, like a music appreciation course I took.
Right.
I really got into that, where I had to go into Boston, to different music venues, classical music, the Baroque period and things like that. And it really woke me up to like, wow, there's some other things out here. I was never a big history person, but it made me, really start paying a little attention more to history. Because, in high school, I was like, in this class, the answers are all in the book. All you got to do is read. There's not a whole lot to think about here. It already happened, But being there and doing that, really kind of opened me up to art appreciation. Both painting. I became a big fan of Monet. you know, through something I had to do. So yeah, so it was more of an arts thing because that was something that I felt that I lacked. You know, I didn't try to play an instrument in high school. You know, I could barely draw a stick man. So, you know, that was something that, you know, really, you know, woke me up in college.
Yeah. Okay. So you know, I always find interesting. One of the things we're trying to do with this project here is that I think our generation was one of the first uh, generations of Black youth that came from parents that were able to give more opportunity. The expanding Black middle class of the '60s, '70s, and '80s. And the question is, you know, we kind of know our parents were restricted, but in some ways the chains, not to think of it literally, were taken off us. And the question is, what do we do with that opportunity? So the question is, you know, can you discuss your family structure? What kind of influence did your family have on you?
So my family definitely. So for me, growing up in East Orange, my parents had divorced when I was young. So I grew up mainly in a single mom home. But you know, I had that family structure. I had an aunt, I had a great grandmother, you know, I had grandmothers around, a lot of strong women in my life. The good thing for me was through my grandmother, my father's mother, I did see my father a lot. So I saw my father every weekend. You know, every week I was spending time with my father. So I don't want to say I had the best of both worlds, but you know, I did have the combination of being able to interact and have them both in my life. But, you know, that led me to say that, you know, hey, when I have a family, you know, I kind of want to try to have that unit, you know, because you always think you want what you didn't have.
Right.
And, grew up realizing that, you know, hey, you know, there were some limitations, but I always felt like I had what I wanted or needed. So, you know, I laugh and joke with some of my friends and say, I didn't really know I was poor until I went to college. You know, but you know, because it was just to kind of wake up to see how other people had lived. But, you know, I did have strong, you know, relationships, you know, with the nucleus of my family and with my father. But, you know, for me, in building that family structure, it was something that I really wanted to try, you know, to maintain, once I started a family. And, you think about, or what I said I would do was kind of think about all the things that I wouldn't do, or what I didn't like, you know, being done to me is what I would apply, you know, to a family.
Right.
And kind of interesting, you know, in retrospect, because you go in with that. But, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, when things get heated, you can only revert to what you know. You know, you can say you want to do some things differently, but that doesn't always happen.
Right. That's bad.
Well,
Well, you got a beautiful wife and family, so that's beautiful. And wish your family well going into the new year and so forth. So let's kind of jump into some East Orange High, because I kind of knew you as a ball player. You had a little game.
well, listen, hey, for a guy who was behind me in high school, I admired your game.
Did you? I appreciate that.
And you know, just how you carried yourself. I mean, because you know, you were more subdued, but you know, to me, always looked confident. But yeah, and you know, I liked watching you play.
I appreciate that. I call myself the Roger Dangerfield of East Orange basketball. But we had a lot of fun. But so let's talk about East Orange. So what are some of your fondest memories of, high school? What were you in any other clubs? Were you in LaBelle's homeroom kind of thing? Were you
I was in his homeroom my senior year. I was part of student council, student court.
Okay.
After basketball, I played a little tennis while I was there. Until the coach kicked me off the team in my senior year.
Tennis game. I didn't know that. That's
yeah.
That came in handy. Cool.
Yeah. My dad and I used to play a lot of tennis together.
Did you know Alan Crook?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was our lead guy.
Yeah, Alan was the tennis guy. He was good. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was our #1 singles player.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, but
So,
yeah,
so what was your experience with basketball? I remember you playing JV basketball.
so played my freshman and sophomore year there.
Yeah.
My junior year, I was one of the last guys to get cut. You know, I thought I had an opportunity. You know, didn't make it my junior year. Senior year, I figured, you know what, Lester doesn't take seniors. Why waste my time?
Right.
You know, so you know, and I enjoyed playing tennis, but my dad used to try to get me when I was younger, and I was like, man, you want me to get beat up walking around 15th Street with a tennis racket in my hand? So whenever I'd go to Montclair on the weekends, you know, my dad and I would always play. We'd go up to Nishuane. So you know, I had a fairly decent game at the time, but you know, it was just something I mainly did with him. It was the thing that he and I did. And then once I stopped playing basketball, and Mr. Fibres, who was the tennis coach in East Orange, he ran Nishuane Park where I played with my dad.
Right.
So he said to me, he's like, you know, you should come play tennis for me. And, you know, I did my junior year, my senior year, you know, I think I was too busy chasing Lynn. So he said to me, hey, listen, why don't you give me that uniform back? You don't want to play any more tennis. And, you know, I was kind of cruising second half of the year, senior year. Yeah. So I was like, you know what, you're right. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now you kind of mentioned 15th Street. So that's kind of down the way.
Down the way.
Guy, you know. So what do you remember about, you know, back in the day? Me some lingo for some folks here. Back in the day, up the way, down the way, compared to urban America today. What do you think about that question?
Well, I mean, you know, to your point, you know, it's just a different phrase. You know, here in Chicago, you have the South Side, you have the West Side.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have sides. We had, you know, up the way, down the way. You know, when I was growing up, you know, most of the football players seemed to come from down the way, and the basketball players were, you know, up the way.
Right.
You know, my big brother, as I call him, was Clarence Turner. Yeah. So, you know, I still give Clarence props because I'm like, you know, Clarence, I got a little clout because I went into high school, you know, as, you know, Clarence's friend, or, you know, Clarence's little brother, Clarence's boy. So, you know, I always tease him about that and call him my big brother. But
I didn't think he was a down the way guy. I thought he was kind of like an Elmwood guy.
Who? Clarence?
No, you. I thought you was.
I was. Well, that's because I tried to play basketball.
Okay.
You know, like, you know, you guys weren't coming down to the Oval to play.
Yeah, you know,
he had to come up to you guys. So, you know, so yeah.
That's interesting. You know, so you kind of mentioned so 15th Street. So you know those areas were kind of bordering north that time. So so what's your viewpoint of kind of, you know, what's happened to North? What's your history of the area? What do you think of the potential hacking in terms of, you know, what you know about urban North and all that kind of stuff?
Well, you know, I'm back in Jersey. My family's still there, so I'm back in Jersey at least, you know, twice a year. I have clients, you know, in the Jersey area. And, you know, just to take you back for a minute, though, when I first moved down the way, because originally, you know, I was from Montclair. I was born in Montclair. Everybody in my family went to Montclair High but me. So moving into East Orange, when I first moved there, you know, 15th Street was like canopied with trees. Right. I mean, it was like, wow, you know, and, you know, right off of Park Avenue, the bridge leading into Newark. I mean, it was different. Once the riots came, once the Newark riots happened, I can remember seeing tanks going down Park Avenue into Newark. And then from that point on, when the riots ended, you just saw the change. Right. You know, they came, you know, they cut down our trees. The canopy that we used to have, you know, was no longer there. And, you know, as a kid, you didn't understand that. You know, later on, you know, you realize why they did it, you know, to keep us hot and bothered, you know, in the summertime, you know, don't let them be cool. But so, yeah, so it was different, not understanding it then and seeing it happen, and now being able to go back and kind of look at it and you know, see the change. And now when I go back home, you know, I usually go through East Orange, you know, I'll go by 15th Street, and, you know, it's just the deterioration is what hurts when you see it now.
Right.
Now, I know it's starting to, you know, turn around a little bit.
Right.
I know when I go to Newark, you know, to me, Newark looks like East Orange used to look like when I was growing up.
Right.
Because, you know, there's that, you know, gentrification happening in Newark, revitalization. And, you know, I'm waiting to see it start to, you know, come to East Orange. But, you know, it's just that cycle that happens to cities, unfortunately.
Right.
You know, it's what I see happening here in Chicago.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's symbolic. You say the cutting down the trees. I'm at to use that. You know, because it is interesting because those neighborhoods in 15th Street were beautiful. You know, you're saying, you know, bordering, you know, Branch Brook Park and, you know, the mansions down there, it's historic housing and bordering up the Bloomfield Avenue. You know, it's a lot of it's a beautiful neighborhood. I you know, and I also think of Presidential Heights area over in the Scott area.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So it's interesting now. So you mentioned an interesting term there, gentrification. You know, and you know, we were talking. We're going to jump into finance and economics here in a second, but you know, different economists and different philosophers have a different viewpoint of the cycle that you're talking about in terms of whether quote unquote gentrification is necessary or bad, and how we should deal with that in the Black community. What's your viewpoint of, you know, how we should view gentrification as a necessary evil, or if it let's say we take a stance that we deny gentrification, do you think that will lead to a permanent state of poverty, or do we need to accept this capitalist, you know, kind of evolution?
I think there's an acceptance that has to be part of it, because, and again, you know, not to get ahead of the conversation, but you know, the issues come down to the school systems.
Okay.
And you know, when you can, and school systems a lot of times depend on tax base or your tax revenue, right? So with a higher property value, you're going to lose some people, right? But you're going to bring in more revenue that hopefully can help you bolster your schools, to improve the school systems.
Right.
Because through my mentoring, Ken, what I really believe the problem is, until we fix school systems, we're not going to change the trajectory of the impoverished areas or the lack of students of color being able to compete the way they should be able to compete. So, I mean, to accept it, I mean, it's hard, but you know, what I looked at when I went to Babson, and something that we didn't talk about was another reason why I chose that, because I didn't really know too many places I could go to get Black folks to hire me. So I realized that I was going to have to learn to be able to, you know, work with, communicate with, and deal with, you know, white people if I wanted to be successful in corporate America, or at least that's what I thought back then. You know, and I think the same thing still holds true. There's really no place, you know, and it's gotten better because we do have more Black-owned businesses, you know, places, but we all can't go there. There's not enough to hire all of us. So there's got to be a commonality of understanding and being able to work with people. I don't have to like you. I need to respect you if it's a job, because, you know, it's a job.
Right.
You know, and, you know, my thought process was never to make work personal, right? I mean, if you and I got along, we got along. If we didn't get along, I was there to do a job, you know, and in order for me to do my job, I had to understand you, you know, I had to be able to communicate with you. And I think the earlier we can, you know, learn to do that and not, you know, try to stay separated. I mean, I think as African-American men, you know, and to be successful, we had to be able to deal in both places. We had to be able to go home and deal, but we needed to go to work and be able to deal. And, you know, I think that gives you a different perspective on just dealing with people as a whole, and understanding how to separate that. Like, you know, not everybody's treated the same, you know, but everybody can be respected. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I think we learned it early in sports. As you were saying that, I think, kind of one of the things that, whether it's basketball or baseball, you recognize people have different skills and there's certain people that you need to be successful in a team sport. And you may not like them.
Totally. Excellent.
You might not like that guy, but he's got to pass you the ball.
Exactly. No, and I mean, and again, I think that's why I like sports and I like basketball, because I think that really helped me to deal with people,
Right.
To understand people and to identify their strengths and their weaknesses.
Exactly.
No, I mean, your analogy was right on, was spot on. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Let's go to your wheelhouse, which is wealth management. So, now as a finance professor, and I kind of understand, personal finance and investments, but you had a long, successful career in wealth management. I want to congratulate you on that, because one is not easy, and to be good at it and develop a client base and deliver service is really a purposeful career. So can you just start, just in general, what role does wealth play in the individual's life, and what role should it play in the Black community? Because I think in the Black community, in fact, I've done studies of this, that our viewpoint of wealth and money is much more conservative than white America. And why is that the case?
I think in general, the case is that there's not an abundance of just being able to do what you want when you want. So from an investing standpoint, being able to say that, yeah, I feel comfortable taking 20% of my portfolio and letting it ride, to be a little more aggressive in the sense that, high risk, high reward, to take that, because being raised to kind of, work hard and save money, but not really being told how to save money. And when your means of saving money is, in some cases, in the olden days, sticking it under the mattress because you didn't trust the banks, or you were putting it in the banks, getting a modest, return, and not really understanding the stock market or how to get involved in that. So I think, that mentality, can consist, because you don't really know. You can be educated, but if your specialty is medicine, doesn't necessarily make you good with money or make you better understand. And if you're not willing to seek the help or ask the questions, you can be smart about other things, but still lack in the knowledge of really how to make your money work for you. Because what I like to tell my students is that as hard as you work for your money needs to work that hard for you.
That's true. Yeah. So what do you see out there in the field? What are you seeing now? The landscape has changed. Our generation came from a very, relatively safe period. We had a few recessions, but this younger generation, millennials, they've been through several crises, including the pandemic. And so I'm told that their viewpoint of institutions in the world, that they tend to try to go around authorities. They're very, like these applications like Cash App. They don't use banks.
Robin Hood.
They don't use taxis. They don't use hotels. So what do you see in terms of the younger generation, some of the habits out there?
So I believe it's all driven by the technology, right? The fact that, from my phone, I can make things happen.
Okay.
From an investment standpoint, I think a good thing for, this generation is the ability to buy fractional shares of stocks.
Okay.
Right. I mean, we couldn't do that unless you were invested and you were reinvesting your dividends. That was the only way you could buy fractional shares. Right. Being able to buy fractional shares, a lot of times people get hung up on the price of a stock versus the value of a stock. And what I'd like to say, is if you have $3,000 that you wanted to invest in a single company, does it really matter if you get 10 shares or one share? $3,000 investment is $3,000 investment. But from a behavioral financial aspect, it's not viewed that way.
Right.
that 3,000 for 100 shares is better than 3,000 for one share. And, it really makes no sense, but it's just the thinking. And now that, you can buy fractional shares, younger people are, are getting involved in buying, like a Tesla or an Amazon or an Alphabet, because they can buy fractional shares and they have an interest because it's affordable to them now. So, part of your question before about, the generation of, or the African-American community, not really being able to access it that way. Whereas you're looking at, a stock at Microsoft and you're saying, you know what, I can't pay 200, or I don't have $232 to put in that stock. But if I could put $50 in it, I might do that. Well, you know where I can put $50? I can put $50 in a bank. So I think, for them, the technology is going to be good from that standpoint. But I think what they lose is the human touch sometimes, right. Because they don't have to communicate to one another the way we communicate with each other.
It's interesting. So let's dig a little deeper in terms of this whole concept of risk management. And so, there's a couple ways to look at it. And let's take it from an entrepreneurial perspective in terms of, Black business. You go into business. Even though you go into business, you're supposed to, even though you're making revenue, you also take on a risk and return. Right. Whether the stock, whether the business, you expose yourself to liabilities, you expose yourself to claims. You're a controller. There's certain labor relations. So when a person with a small business, they have to learn a lot in a short period of time. What are some of the ways that, we can maybe have small business incubators, or you say you're doing teaching, what do you see that we need to be educated in terms of the whole risk management of small business?
So I think especially, and again, being general in our community, right, you got to know where to go because you can't do it all yourself, right? And I think too many people they don't want to ask for help, or they don't know where to go for trusted help, or, I know what I'm good at. Here's what I want to do, but how do I turn it into a business?
Yeah.
And I think, just, what you're doing here right now. I mean, I know this is for young, for younger men, young African-American men that have positive roles, but it could be to help us, right? If we're trying to do something, to know that, what, I might be able to talk to, Dr. Daniels about that. Right. He had a guy on, he said something that I'd like to, know a little bit more about. But, being confident enough to know where to go. One thing that, I want to touch on is, when we came up, we were always told we had to be better, right? If we wanted to make it, we had to be better, than our white counterparts. Mm-hmm. And I think we did a lot of damage to some of us, because being better is a lot of pressure, right? And I know I met people, I worked with people who were better, but you know what they weren't? They weren't confident. Mm-hmm. And confidence goes a long way, because in my corporate career, I watched confident Caucasian men get up there and not know what they were talking about, but talk without stuttering, and people bought it. Right. Where somebody else went up there who knew they were talking, knew their stuff, but got a little nervous, didn't seem as confident, and got picked apart. Right. And that was my eye opener to say that, what we have to start really preaching is helping people understand, be confident in what you know, right? And be willing to say what you don't know, but know where to go. And also learn to take the temperature of your audience, learn to understand who you're talking to, what you can get away with and what you can't get away with. Because sometimes you got to fake it till you make it. But when you're doing that, you better know who's in the audience.
That's great advice. You tell you've been around a block or two. That's it. That's some old school stuff there. But you know, I want to take this a couple of different directions, but I want to give us time to talk about this now in terms of Black Lives Matter, because it's kind of the it's the thought of the day, the movement of the day. People comparing it to the civil rights movement. It's the next leg up, and then I want to after that I want to take it from a philosophical position. So, trying to give you a heads up here, some Du Bois stuff, and taking it back there in terms of the philosophy of being Black. So, the whole thing of a lot of people, in fact, I had Joe Dunstan on, he said that, we should be talking about Black Lives Matters also, that the terminology matters here, because in some ways we're scaring white America, or they're not comfortable with the terminology.
Yeah, totally.
Terminology like defund the police. So just in general, what's your feeling about Black Lives Matter? How you feel? Is the movement going in the right direction? Does some of this terminology concern you?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Joe on the terminology. And, not to jump ahead, and I'll come back to that, but you mentioned defund the police.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the minute they said that, I threw my hands up in the air. Like, don't do that. All you're doing is giving the other side ammunition to frame what you're trying to say. Right. So really talk about what it is you want them to do. So when you and I grew up, right, if there was a domestic disturbance on the street or whatever, we had social services that used to come out, right? It wasn't a cop coming out with his gun drawn, trying to de-escalate something. Well, how do you de-escalate a situation with your gun out, especially in the African-American community, right? With everything that's happened. So to me, defund the police really meant was, hey, we need to start directing dollars back into these areas that mental health, right? These things that, we would see growing up, right? Now you don't have that anymore. The minute something is going wrong, especially in our communities, who's showing up? It's the police showing up. Right. They don't have the skills to de-escalate those type of situations. And I think the rhetoric that was used, especially with that, was just a way to really give the other side the ammunition to say, see, they don't respect authority. They don't respect law and order. And that's really not what they meant, but they started running with that. And I was like, you had a good cause going here and you're about to blow it if you keep that rhetoric going. And that was just, my personal thoughts on hearing that. But for me, Black Lives Matter, was a little bit of a wake up in the sense that, having my corporate career and, kind of seeing things, I never thought, things, maybe things have gotten a little better, but things weren't, really where we thought they were, because there were a lot of people walking around trying to be politically correct or acting politically correct, not saying what they really wanted to say. And we saw that when Obama was elected. We started seeing, the blinds open a little bit to say, whereas things that you hadn't heard, you were starting to hear again. So it's not that it went away, it was just behind the blinds.
In the closet, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Trump came along and just said, you know what? Hey, do and say whatever you want, whenever you want. You don't have to be politically correct.
Right.
And, he didn't make them the way they were. He just helped to embolden them to say, you know what, be who you are. And you know what? And I'm supporting you. Right. And sometimes all you need is a little support. You just need you need to think somebody has your back. And you know what? I'm gonna do that. Where before maybe not too willing to do that. So to get back to the Black Lives Matter, for me, I used to kind of complain about my kids a little bit, and I always say to my friends, they didn't get to where they are by themselves. We helped put them there because, we tried to give them the things that we didn't have growing up. And my kids definitely grew up different than I did. And, in my mind, probably a little more privileged than I was. But who did that to them? They didn't do that on their own. I had skin in that game. But what opened my eyes was when this all started, how my son and daughter reacted.
Okay.
And my son is on the radio here in Chicago.
Okay.
And he went to his radio station and said, "You have to let me say something. I'm a Black man on the radio in Chicago. I have a voice, and this is our city."
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised. I was proud, but it made me realize his privilege is what allowed him to do that. Because my example or my looking back at my career, I went to the Million Man March. I participated in the Million Man March.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember letting them know on my job that I was going, right? And I was nervous about doing that. And, I got asked all these questions. And I was more worried about my job because I couldn't go back home, right? If I lost my job, where was I going to go? Was I going to, go back? And you know what? Maybe my mother would have let me in, but, I was too worried about keeping my job, where my son was worried about making a statement, having a voice, trying to change the situation. And it wasn't that I didn't want to change the situation. That's why I was going. It was the Million Man March. Brothers were coming together. I wanted to be part of that. But in the back of my mind, I was worried about my job when he wasn't. And that privilege, my eyes opened, because to me, that was him having that privilege and applying it somewhere.
Yes. So where do you think so we know that police brutality is the main focus of the movement. Where do you think it needs to go economically? I know you mentioned the importance of education. Where else do you think the movement can go in terms of what should be a pillar or plank of the movement, other than police brutality?
So education, to me, first and foremost, right? From the business community. I mean, this also woke up some business communities, right? How many Black board members are there on corporation boards? A good business should look like its community, right? To get that diversity. I think it should be sweeping. I think, now's the time, to make things happen, to ask for those things, because it was the perfect storm. I really think, Ken, if there wasn't COVID-19, that whole Black Lives Matter, George Floyd might have lasted 3 weeks and it had been done, because people would have been going back to work. The difference was in this one, it just wasn't us that were out there. You had a lot of white folks coming out. You had a lot of people of color, out there, because they had the time to say something, and again, they weren't worried about, I got to go to work the next day. I think that, to me, and this is my personal feeling, I think that played a lot into it, that this was the perfect storm, with COVID being around, people having time to go do those things. Otherwise, it could have been a couple weekends, and that's not the first time that happened. George Floyd wasn't the first. Breonna Taylor wasn't the first. These things had happened before, but now there was an ability to focus and stay on it. So I said to my kids, it's your time, not mine. I'll support you, but you know what? I've kind of been there. This is yours to carry now. What are you going to do with it? And tell me how I could support you, but I'm not the guy that's going to be out there marching in the street right now.
Gotcha. Well, let me get a little philosophical, because as I started to read, be exposed to more of these Black Lives Matter, Black issues, I started going back and reading Du Bois and trying to go back and get the genesis of, this Black struggle. And one of the concepts that Du Bois talked about was this duality of consciousness, where he talks about as that we as Black people, we're one of the only races that has to see our eyes through another race of white people, because we've been exposed to, whether it's racism or oppression. So when you're oppressed, you're forced to see your eyes through your oppressor, because you're always trying to struggle. You're struggling against something. You're always pushing up against the wall. So therefore, you have to think of, well, how can I improve myself against my oppressor? And as you mentioned, you mentioned at your board meeting that the white guys that at some of the board, they never had that. So they get up and they just talk confidently because they never have to think about oppression or being pushed back. So, what do you think about, this whole thing of double consciousness? How do we think of a young black man, a young black man are forced at a young age to think of double consciousness? And it has to have some psychological impact long term.
So I think if you understand what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't change the situation, right? You're not all of a sudden going to will the power of money to Black folks or to people of color, right? So to survive in that game, right, you got to learn how to play the game,
Okay.
right? And it's one thing if you know you're playing the game versus being thrown in the game thinking that you're surviving.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, we get a position, they like me, I'm fitting in, you start to get comfortable. And you should always have that look of, what, I'm in their world, right? I'm surviving. I want this to be my world because a lot of times that's what we want. We want the same things, right? But we don't have the control, right? And then, like I said earlier, how we have to be able to deal on both sides. I got to be able to go to work, and have a good face. I got to come home and I got to have that same good face. So how do you not get lost or not get swallowed in that? If you understand it, I think it's more manageable, right? So if we do a better job of explaining and teaching this, because we weren't taught that. We were taught that, go to college, get a good education, get a good job.
Right.
We weren't taught the games you would have to play or what you might have to do to try to be accepted or fit in. Right. And you should draw a line of understanding what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, and understand it's not always about just chasing the dollars, but that's something I think you have to learn if you don't already have the dollars.
That's true. Well, a lot of people, that's where things like fraternities and, sororities, they teach these soft skills of fitting in. The clubhouse, the country club, you kind of rub shoulders with people and you kind of learn the game, and we need to develop these soft networks in the Black community that may not exist. I think it goes further than that. I think one of the points I'm trying to make in my book is that in the Black community, we have a dearth of institutions that other communities have that we should be trying to build. And entrepreneurship is a part of that, but it goes even further than that in terms of, probably the strongest institution in the Black community is the church. But we don't have as many small businesses. We don't have as many banks, financial advisors. I mean, the economic gap is so wide, I can go on and on and on. Whereas, you take a look at the white community, it's much more complicated, sophisticated in terms of all these gaps that are filled by entrepreneurship and, social networks other than the church. And, I think that's something that we need to talk about. Should the Black church do everything? Does it have to be the child care center, the bank, but it's filling a vacuum, so that's why it kind of, does those things.
I think that, the church is always a good meeting place.
Yeah.
Right. Because it and again, it's supposed to feel like a safe place. It doesn't for everyone, unfortunately. But I think, from my mentoring, now that I'm doing it, and when I look back, I think part of the problem is, and I'm only going to speak for my community, for our community, because that's the only place I try to do it. But a lot of times we're not willing to meet the students or the person we're trying to mentor where they are, right? I think the key is when you want to help somebody, it's helping them where they are, not where you think they should be or where you want them to be.
Right.
And once you get past that, when you meet them where they are, it just opens them up a little more. But when you're trying to pull them to a point that maybe they're not ready for, or they don't see that they're ready for, it causes that friction.
Right.
I'm spinning my wheels and we're not getting anywhere.
Gotcha.
So I really think, one, we have to want to give back. I always say, in mentoring, each one teach one. If everybody just looked back to, to teach another one, I think we could advance that much further. But in doing that, understanding that I'm going to meet you where you are, not where I want you to be, but I'm going to try to get you to where I think you should be. But I got to first start by meeting you where you are. Because, some of the guys I mentor with, I hear them complain about the generation, the younger generation, the social media. And granted, you don't have to agree with it, but just understand that's where they are. Now, understanding that, that's a big part of what they do. How do you help them now? Not that I don't want to deal with that or that's not right. That's where they are. So let's meet them there and see how we bring them forward.
That's a fantastic point. So I could talk to you for 2-3 hours, but let me stay. I want to get to some of the soft, fun issues, but you're such a good knowledge of all the hard stuff. I got to give you another hard one. So, reparations. It's it's thrown around. Is it serious? Biden is talking about doing something along these lines of bringing a bill of reparations. In Canada, they take reparations seriously. The indigenous Indians in Canada had genocide campaign, and they gave a percentage of the GDP. They give them it's a huge number that they gave in Canada. In Australia, when they did the Olympics, they recognized the genocide of the Australian Aborigines. And we can't even get a serious discussion in the United States. So what's your viewpoint on reparations? Where's this headed?
So I don't think about it a lot. And the reason why, no, because like you said, it's kicked around, I hear it, I don't see it happening. But what I would like to see it be focused on is the education.
Gotcha.
You know what? I don't want you giving out checks, right? I want you to make private schools available to our students, right? I want you to make job training, job opportunities available to our students. I want you to help send our students to college when they can't afford to go to college. I would like to see it done in that way, not a blank check that I can go out and buy a new big screen TV and put on my wall, and not everybody, would do that. But, if you just give out money, what's going to happen with it, right? Some people are going to be smart about it. Some people aren't. But from my mentoring, I just go back to education, and I think there's a generation that we've lost, right? And, if a parent doesn't really care about education, then how do they make their children, or how do they instill in their children that education is important if it wasn't important to them? So I think trying to revamp that system and using that reparations to help better that educational opportunity, because we lose them early,
right?
And that's how I would like to see it done. But to your point, it's been kicked around so much. Again, watch your rhetoric, when you talk about it, and what do you really want to see come out of it? How do we right those wrongs?
Right. So, you're in Chicago, and I always look up Chicago because I know it has this strong Black professional class. It's connected to the Delta of Mississippi. There's a long history of migration of Mississippi, Chicago, and the blues, and a lot of tradition and history there. And I always felt that Chicago had something that the Northeast didn't have, which is a strong, even though in the Northeast, we kind of have a Black coalition, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. I always felt that Chicago had a stronger Black coalition politically and economically than New York, New Jersey. Is that true?
I don't see it. Here's what I would say about Chicago that you don't have in New York. So, because of my UPS moving around, I reload a few places. I call Chicago the biggest small city I've ever been a part of. and here's why I say that, right? Okay. So being involved with 100 Black Men of Chicago, right? I honestly think if I was still living on the East Coast, if I was in New York, chances are I would have never tried to become part of the 100 Black Men of New York City.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because of the status it has in New York City. Right. You have a lot of corporate, executives, that are, part of it or, running it or whatever. And not that you don't have that here in Chicago, but the degrees of separation in the Black community in Chicago just seem to be that much smaller for a city of this size. Right. So
that's the clue. It has more, it's stickier. It's stickier.
So, one, there's less. I mean, the population is smaller. I mean, It's not that much smaller, but I see the connectiveness that you're referring to.
Right.
But I don't see it as a large economic advantage.
Right.
I see it more as a connection of the community, to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. But also what I would say about Chicago is Chicago's got some of the craziest politics I've ever seen. So, right. I mean, there's somebody going to jail every year here on both sides, right. And it knows no color. So, it's, and again, I think that goes back, to the history of just, Chicago and its politics. But, watching that whole dynamic, to me, it's like worse than Jersey. But Jersey is, it's more mob related or what we believe to be that, when we were growing up. But here it's just a different animal, it's a different monster. But I would say, your word, the stickiness, it's probably a little more stickier in that sense that you're able to, maneuver, connect. Yeah. But what you're getting out of that connection, I'm not sure yet.
Gotcha. That's a good way to put it. So let's get to some lighter stuff because you're a sports enthusiast. You've been to Syracuse. You've seen a lot of Essex County basketball. So I want to throw you a lob first, throw you a slam dunk. So if you would talk about
this is a tough one. I was dreading this question, but go ahead.
If you think of any 5 athletes, football, basketball, baseball, who pops in your mind? Let's keep it let's not talk professional athletes. Let's keep it at the college and high school level that you've seen that kind of jumps out of you, it's an athletic beast.
So when I read this question, right, and I was, thinking about being in East Orange and, when I really was just like, oh man, basketball crazy, football I watched, but, my dad was a big football player, tried to force it on me. So I kind of backed away from it. So I would watch it, the Montclair, East Orange rivalries, things of that nature. Yeah. But when I thought about basketball, man, I thought about my freshman year, right? Seeing the Kenny Young team.
Wow.
Right? And who they played against. So, Dabney I missed, right? I knew of him. I saw him play at Rutgers. I didn't really see his high school career. Yeah. But the people who came to mind was, Kenny Young.
Right.
Edgar Jones.
Right.
Greg Tynes.
Yeah.
McDonald. These were guys that, I was coming into high school, like, wow, oh man, these guys are, unbelievable. Right. So it was, football, I had a cousin who played at Montclair who was a running back. I remember watching him eat East Orange up. His name was Teddy Irvin, You know, I was like, you know, wow. You know, Stephen Shaw.
Yeah,
You
Shaw was a
know,
bit. I said, let's talk about Steve Shaw, because I think Shaw as an athlete gets overlooked a lot because, you know, he's a monster.
Shaw was a beast, man.
But people don't realize that Shaw was a pretty good basketball player.
Shaw was an excellent basketball player, but just decided to stop playing.
I know.
I mean, Shaw was the Clarence Turner of my class, and probably better. I mean, as much as I love Clarence, I mean, Shaw was the everything, you know, baseball, basketball, football, track.
In baseball, I don't think a lot of people notice that Shaw pitched a no-hitter
Yeah.
against SS Catholic when SS Catholic was the #1 team in the state. Now, I caught that game, and we were winning that game up to the last inning, and he actually pitched a no-hitter, and they won the game on an error.
Yeah. You know what? I remember hearing about that now that you brought that up. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a lot.
Listen, Shaw was probably I remember when I first met Shaw at VLD, and I was going out for the VLD basketball team. We were 7th graders, and I think Ricks was the coach.
Yeah.
And we were, you know, he just called Shaw over to do something, and it was like all net. Like, you know, kind of, you know, shoot over my, you know, raised hands or something. And, you know, a few people tried to do it, and Shaw came out there. And, you know, Shaw was kind of stocky.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't, you know, your regular basketball body, but he could move. He was quick.
Yeah.
You know, so Shaw was definitely somebody, you know, I admired.
All right, so give me a couple more names. Let's keep going. Let's keep going down. Who else impressed you? Give me an oval name. Let's go down the way.
Listen, I gotta say my boy Clarence. I mean,
you gonna that hand?
he was the quarterback, right?
Okay.
Baseball.
He played baseball and basketball.
And he played basketball too. I mean, you know. And you know, he was a lightweight Don Juan. You know, I used to check him out and laugh, like, all right, Clarence, man, how you doing that, man? Like, come on. How you doing that? I need to learn how to do some of that. Come on. So yeah.
Some stories. CT and Copeland.
Let me see, Bo. Bo and Bryant. What's Bo's last? Mumford. Bo Mumford.
Bo Mumford. Yeah.
Bo was a bad boy.
Yeah.
You know, ahead of me. I'm trying to think who else down the way.
All right, now Kenny Macklin, he's a down the way oval kind of guy. Did you run into him down there, Mac?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, you know, Mac, I only knew stories about Mac. I never got to see him play. But you know, one thing, you know, about Mac for me is, and he didn't say this to me, but Mac helped me to develop more confidence in myself than I ever had myself.
Really? Now, how's that?
And so, you know, after playing JV ball, you know, I was a little, you know, again, not real confident in my game, you know, being on the team. And, you know, Kim McCoy, Kim Alvin.
Yeah.
She came to me because she was like the school newspaper. And she said she had done an interview with Mac, right? And she said, you know what, Joel, I'm going to share with you something he said about you. And he said that he expected a lot more out of you, you know? And I mean, for her to say that to me, I didn't think she was really lying to me. And it was something that the light bulb didn't go off immediately. But that summer, right, I was in the Oval, you know, and again, you know, I was in high school, so I could get on the show court, right? But, you know, again, I was only a sophomore, so I didn't get on the show court too many times. And Mac put me on his team. Mac was like, come on, Joel, you're playing with my team, right? And, you know, Mac was, you know, like making me play. Like he fed me the ball a few times, you know, to take my shot and everything. And I left there that day going, this guy thinks I can play. He believed that I had, I mean, at least this was my walkaway. He didn't say this to me, but after what Kim had said to me about, you know, he expected more, it made me say that, you know what, he saw something in me that I don't see in myself.
Right.
And through the years, I've always gone back to that.
Right.
And that's why I was, so big and wanting to be part of the celebration we did for him.
Right.
I was like, listen, y'all doing something for Mac, I'm down.
Right.
And I've never really shared that with him, but that was something that Kim had said to me. It stuck with me. And then when I played with him in the park, because, I mean, there were other guys. And,
right.
He put me on his team. And, it wasn't like you just on my team, come on, play, take your shot, So, yeah, so it was something for me that, later, I would always go back when I was not feeling, like, hey, you know what, there was a guy who believed in me when I don't think I believed in myself.
Right. So, the stories of the Oval being this cultural place, Negro baseball. I don't know if you're familiar with this, that it had Negro baseball.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the only park, they say Oval was the only park that at nighttime all the lights were on. It was like a cultural place, Stockton place, all these stuff. Do you have any memories of that? Is there anything parallel to that in Chicago?
So I'm probably at an age that I'm not looking for that in Chicago. So I really can't answer that. Okay. I'm sure there is.
All right.
But no, I remember vividly, going to the Oval. The crazy thing was I would lose my bike sometimes because you didn't lock your stuff up, right?
So somebody stole your bike?
So no, listen. Always some older guy would take my bike, right? They could be gone. They could be gone for 2 hours. I mean, okay. I was there playing basketball.
Right, got you. Okay.
But I knew I couldn't go home without my bike. Right? So I had to stay until my bike came back. Now, sometimes that meant I stayed past my curfew,
right.
And I got in trouble, or I got my butt whooped for coming home late. But what I wasn't going to do was go home without my bike.
Right. Everybody had that. Yeah.
So here's how I remedied that. I remedied that. I learned how to ride a unicycle, and I started riding my unicycle to the Oval, dribbling my basketball.
Really? Oh, yeah. That had to be quite a sight.
Yeah. So, but I mean, we have, they had the baseball stadium,
right.
There. They had lights there. They had leagues going on, so it was always lit up. Mm-hmm. The Oval wasn't as big as Elmwood Park, but it had decent size. It had some tennis courts at the far end. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was always lit up. You had one single court, right? You had some playgrounds in between, and then you had a double court. So the single court was the show court. Okay. So the little knuckleheads, when I was, junior high, that's rarely did you play on the show court.
Right.
But once I got to I played JV, I started getting a little time on the show court.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, the Oval was, that was the spot, man. There'd be some music in there from time to time. Exactly, yeah. It was, that was my childhood playground.
Got it. Well, Joe, we done ran through an hour plus, so it's been fantastic, Yeah. And but I'm gonna let you take it out with a final question here. First, I want to say thank you. I really appreciate the support, and I think we're doing a decent job here of promoting some positive images. So so as you think of the future, 2021 and beyond, what are some of your hopes and dreams for the future?
So I think, what I think about now coming out of 2021 is, just for people to, be thankful, for you survived this, if you did, I know some people lost some people, but, we've never been through a pandemic, we've read about it. So, what I'd like to see is for the movement, for Black Lives Matter, for us to take advantage of the opportunities that it's presented. Minds have been opened, right? So how you say strike when the iron's hot? I think the iron's hot right now. So I think there's some opportunities to be taken advantage of, to benefit from. And I just hope we can, just come together and, help one another out, be a little more open to, hey, if I can help a brother out, I can help a brother out. That those days of I'm the only brother in the room, You know, like let's get past that. You know, let's really, you know, do what they've always done. You know, like, hey, you know, a brother that can do it. Hey, man, like, hey, I got a guy. You know, and not be too worried about how is that going to affect, you know, where I'm at. You know, but no, I mean, I don't have to qualify him. I know he's got the skill set. I'm passing him off. I'm not trying to qualify him before I bring him in the door. You know what? There's opportunity. You know, let's share it and let's help one another out. So, you know, it's the same old story. It's nothing new, but you know, let's just take it in a different direction now. Let's see that there's been some opening. There's been some more talk. Let's keep the talk going before the door closes.
Beautiful. Well, Joe, that's a great message to end on. So I want to say thank you. The Daniels Foundation's appreciate you. Now, as I said earlier, you're the first formal recognition of the Daniels Foundation Wall of Excellence. That's a great honor.
Well, listen.
If I get some money, I'm gonna make some plaques up.
well, listen. You know what? Let's talk about, you know, fundraising. Like, what can we do to fundraise for your foundation? Can we put together a golf tournament? Can we come back to East Orange and do something?
Great idea.
You know, one to have some fun. You know, get the guys out. You know, get the sisters out. Right. You know, again, you know, we're trying to get to the other side of COVID, but you know, think about as a community. You know, how can we make some things happen?
It's a great idea. Maybe around come and do a little golf tournament.
Yeah, definitely. You know, keep me. You know, I mean, because you know, we all like to think we can play a little bit these days. You know, get out and talk a little junk, but if we can do it and raise some funds, you know, to help out some, you know, maybe it's some scholarship money, you know, maybe it's, you know, feed the homeless money, maybe it's whatever your foundation wants to do it, but just to get the support and, you know, to have the conversation.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, I appreciate that.
I'm in. Keep me posted. Hey, this was a pleasure, man. I wasn't sure how this was gonna go, but I was like, all right, I'm gonna give him the respect and show up, but I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It's fun, man. It's always fun, you know, just free flowing and, you know, speak our mind. I think we had some nice topics, so I appreciate it.
It was good seeing you and good talking to you. I appreciate it.
All right, I'll be in touch, Joe.
All right, take care. Have a good night. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.